Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at Salesforce. It is time for another update, and on this chart we have been tracking the idea of a 1-2 setup where we are now focusing on a larger wave tree to unfold. For this larger wave tree we have a quite complex and difficult structure, as there is no clear impulse here within this wave tree complete. Now this would allow me to even consider that this wave tree isn't necessarily already at the top and that we may still see further extensions, but in the end I will need to track a probably slightly deeper area of support for a full confirmation that we will not extend to higher prices. For this I will consider that perhaps a top might be in place for this wave 3, and we might still be looking for the wave 4 correction, as from the current low we have only managed to build a 3-wave pattern in this area. Now this does not mean I cannot track a scenario that does allow for a wave 4 bottom to be in place, whether it is within a larger wave 3 or not, but it would need to unfold as an ending diagonal in a 1-2 setup in this area. Now ultimately, the last level of support I'm watching for continuation to higher prices is here, the $89.5 level. Keep in mind a reset of the wave 4, meaning we break below the beginning of this move to the upside, would already significantly hurt the likelihood of this structure succeeding in building this pattern, simply due to the proportions we would see here within this wave 4. Now ideally we actually follow through here in the green scenario, where we are tracking an internal 1-2 setup to form, where we would be looking for a 5-wave move to the upside within an ending diagonal in a 5th wave. Now internally we are looking at an area of support between the $244.6 all the way down to the $158.5 level. Within this pattern we have been looking for a potential bottom, although the structure was strongly suggesting to us that we should be looking still for lower prices. We even had a potential initial 5-wave move to the downside building, but fortunately it didn't necessarily complete it. However, we at the same time failed to create an uptrend from this low. Now within this wave 2 correction we are tracking in the green structure. We are looking at a potential ABC pattern to unfold. The exact count within this area is going to be rather difficult to identify, as many options are available. So for example, I could consider the wave A bottom to be perhaps even here, and have here a wave B top and a C wave unfolding to the downside. In the end, not many differences will form in the larger time frame between those scenarios, but I could also consider the wave A to have bottomed here instead and have this as the wave B top. I would still be looking for a potential wave C. I would still be looking for a continuation to lower prices. Sure, the ideal target would vary slightly, but nothing too significant that wouldn't allow us to gauge better based on the internal structure when we should expect a bottom to be in place. Now within this idea of an extended wave C like this, I would be watching the 100% extension for the ideal target at the $185 level. This is probably my preferred interpretation, and this is what we will be focusing on. Now keep in mind, we don't need to get to this ideal target, but at the same time we don't need to stop there. However, we do have additional structural support right here around the 78.6% extension, and we have formed previously those significant lows in the area between $201 all the way up to the $209. We have already formed an internal local low in this push to the downside last week, although it seems not to be too much of a significant one, as the structure already seems to be extending to even lower prices. Now within the wave C we are looking of course to build a 5-wave pattern. That is always what we are tracking within a wave C, and I would assume this to be an ending diagonal, as clearly we only have a 3-wave move to the downside within this area. I would consider this to even be an undershoot or an overshoot, however you may want to call it in this case, but here I would track probably something like an ABC structure to have formed within this wave 2. We would have had an area of resistance in which we have pushed perfectly into the 61.8% retracement before continuing to lower prices. Now, part of this wave 3, I would expect an ABC pattern to unfold, as once again we are tracking an ending diagonal within the larger wave C. In this idea, I could be looking for a bottom within this wave A to form sooner rather than later, as even within the idea of an impulse, it does seem to be towards the end of this movement. Now, keep in mind, I could still see very easily another fourth and a fifth before we would have a more significant bottom, but nothing too major should be expected. In the end, I wouldn't be surprised if we had already bottomed within this wave A, and for a more generic resistance area that will encompass everything we should consider for a potential ABC structure within this area, I would be watching the levels between the $230 all the way up to the $255 level. In the end, I wouldn't focus too much on the internal structure, but if we wanted to notice the first level of resistance that could come ahead for us in this structure, I would be watching the $221, yeah, the 23.6% retracement for a potential third wave that would have extended in this area instead. Although I cannot confirm that even this internal structure to the downside has a more substantial bottom, and extensions are always possible, so be prepared for it. But for me to consider this larger wave 3 complete, I would need to see a more substantial correction in a wave B, and to have the bottom in the wave A, a more substantial correction in a wave B, and an extension to even lower prices in a wave C. If we want, we can even look for an ideal target for the overall wave 3, and that would be at the 138.2% extension of the wave 1. So far, we are looking at the $185.7 level. That is, if I remember correctly, very much in line with the ideal target for the entire wave to the downside. Now, keep in mind, even though we are focusing on the idea of a wave C within this area, it is probably the preferred interpretation. We could see an early bottom. Remember, we had the idea that potentially we had this as a wave A low, a wave B up, and a wave C that could form a bottom sooner rather than later. Ultimately, we are within an area of support that could technically be used. Now, it's not ideal because we don't have here an initial 5-wave move to the upside. We have a potential top in a 3-wave pattern in this area. You could consider this technically to be some sort of an accumulation area, although we have certainly seen much better opportunities even in the recent timeframes, even in the recent days. Yeah, for example, on ARM, we are actually looking at a better potential. I would consider, doesn't mean it will succeed and this one will fail. Yeah, could be the opposite. But for example, based on the opportunities, I might consider that one to be a little bit higher up there. Now, if we happen to form a more clear bottom within this area and have an initial confirmation, especially within this larger area of support, that could become very, very interesting very quickly. But until such is the case, I would be still skeptical, at least until we have a more clearly full count within a 5-wave move to the downside within this area. Yeah, at least consider this wave A to have a more clearly full count before you would look for a potential bottom in this area. I would still expect this to extend a little bit further. Yeah, maybe a tiny fourth and a fifth within this area. Yeah, I would consider this wave to the downside to need to actually complete before we would even be able to have a full count within other structures that would consider a bottom earlier, yeah, sooner rather than later. But for now, these are the levels, this is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and let me know what else you want me to cover, and I'll do my best to do that in the days and weeks ahead. And until then, I hope you have a nice day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.